My cousin, best friend, and molester. Okay, let's not meet. Here's another one from me. I've been through a lot in my short 18 years of life. I grew up in rural Louisiana. My mother was 19 when I was born, and I have no clue how old my father was. Neither of them were in my life as I was growing up, and my maternal grandmother and grandfather raised me until I turned 7, when my aunt and uncle adopted me. Anyways, I moved to Anchorage, Alaska, then Vegas, and then decided to head back to Louisiana for college. Well, when I was younger, I had a cousin my age named Mark, but we would call him Woodda as a family nickname. We were super close growing up, and after I was adopted, I didn't have any contact with him. The first time I'd seen him was the one time I came back for a family vacation. It was exactly 7 years later, making the both of us 14. At some point during this vacation, the two of us ended up alone. It was then that he started to ask me if I'd ever had sex before, and if I had a boyfriend. I was a pretty sheltered kid, so I answered him no to both questions. And he took advantage of this by telling me that I could lose my virginity to him, and it wouldn't hurt because he knew what he was doing. He proceeded to pull down my pants and underwear and attempted to give me oral sex. Luckily, my mother happened to walk in the house, which caused him to leave and gave me time to gather my bearings. I didn't tell anyone about it. I don't know if I felt guilty or if I was scared, but I do know I was confused. Fast forward 4 years later, I come home to visit family before I head off to school. Woodda is still there, and still being creepy. In front of everyone, he pretends to treat me like we're still best of friends, and touches my hair and hugs me, which drives me insane. In passing, he brushes his hand against my butt and shoots me sly looks. I try my hardest to make sure we aren't alone. Present day, the fall semester is about to begin again, and much to my dismay, my father sent me back south a week early. I have no choice but to stay with the family that houses Woodda. I've definitely stayed clear of him so far, but I have 4 more days before I can leave and go back to campus. I don't know what to do, but he's still as disgusting as ever, forcing himself on me, asking me to do his hair and trying to playfully touch me. Please, guys, I need some help.
Creepy Uncle Tim. I was 7 years old when I first met my Uncle Tim from my father's side of the family. Until that point, I never even knew that I had an uncle. I thought I only had aunts. I was so thrilled to meet him. He was so nice and treated me like an angel. I would sit on his lap and he would comb his fingers through my hair, commenting on how beautiful and long it was. I would begin to see Uncle Tim more often since then. He immediately became my favorite out of all my father's siblings. He even told me that I was his favorite too. He would tell me the same things over and over again, which is how beautiful I was, and will be when I'm older, etc. I never got tired of hearing it, until one day, I began to feel uneasy about him. He would look at me oddly, almost lustful-like, and rub my back, arms, shoulders, and hair more than a person should. He would kiss my cheek, making me feel uncomfortable, but I didn't have the courage to ask him not to do that anymore. My 14th birthday was the final straw in the kissing. He kissed me on the cheek and told me to kiss his, but right as I was leaning to peck it, he turned his face towards mine, and I ended up kissing his lips. I felt so disgusted by that, and later told my mom that I didn't like him kissing my cheeks. I didn't want her to tell him directly, because I didn't want to hurt his feelings, so she made an announcement to the adults about refraining from touching the younger ones. The touchings calmed down, but then came the camera. Every time we saw my uncle, he had a camera with him and would snap photos of us. He took photos at birthdays, dinners, and when he came over to visit, it was like non-stop, I swear. Once I hit puberty, my breasts began forming. I mean, they were really forming. Once I got to high school, I was carrying D cups. Everyone noticed, but not to the extent of how much Tim would notice them. If it weren't for his continuous long stares and accidental brushings against them, then I wouldn't have noticed. When I became 16, I became sort of uneasy. My family was invited to my cousin's birthday party, and my uncle was there, and of course, he had his camera strapped around his neck. He began taking his pictures, and he would take them when the camera was facing me. He would do this throughout the day, and I became irritated and told him, "Shouldn't you be taking pictures of the birthday girl? If you take another picture of me, I'm gonna take that camera and smash it." I said something along those lines. He denied taking pictures of me, but I wasn't stupid. I knew he was. I would complain about Tim to my parents a lot. My mother thought he was a bit on the strange side, but my dad always supported him and ignored my complaints, stating I was being overdramatic and misinterpreting him. He said that Tim only thought of me as his daughter. He would basically guilt-trip me. I began thinking I was being too harsh on him, so I tried pushing aside my negative thoughts of him. That is, until the day I went to his new home. He had just bought a new house, and through a little housewarming, he and my dad went to go buy beer, and as they were gone, I checked out the house. I made it into his bedroom and saw that his computer was on. I decided to check my Facebook on it, and once I exited out of the browser, I noticed a folder on his desktop. The cover of the folder was an image of a girl, and that girl happened to be me. I clicked the folder, and what I saw made my stomach drop. All the pictures in it were of me. These pictures dated all the way back when he first got his camera. They were pictures of me at every event we were at, even at my cousin's birthday party. The time he claimed he didn't take photos of me. They were all of me. What made me so frightened was the other pictures of me that weren't at these events. They were pictures of me outside of school, at parks with my friends, etc. He was freaking stalking me. I literally wanted to throw up. I was so disgusted and scared at the same time. He had more folders, but I was frightened to look through them, afraid there would be pictures of me nude. I was beginning to feel paranoid that he might have placed hidden cameras in my house or something like that. I rushed to my mom quickly and told her about the pictures. She saw them for herself and was horrified. Once my dad and uncle returned, my mother had a talk with my dad. He denied that his brother would do something like that, but we had the proof. We took him into the room and revealed the files to him at that moment. He didn't say a word as he looked through them. He said he would have a talk with him and told us to go home. We did. Once home, I was afraid to even be there because I felt that there were cameras watching me all the time. I really was paranoid, and to this day, I sometimes get paranoid about things like that. My dad came home a few hours later and appeared sad. He said he made Tim delete every single picture of me and to never see us again. For the next few months, my dad was a bit depressed. He was close with my uncle. He was like his role model since he was young. He was deeply saddened by what he did. He would even try to convince himself that Tim wasn't a creep, to which I would get angry by. I understood that he really admired his brother, but it was time to realize what type of person he really was. As the years passed, no one acknowledged him as part of the family, not even my extended family. I thought it was because of the pictures of me, but many years later, I found out it wasn't the only reason why. My mom finally told me that once my dad had a talk with Tim, my uncle became angry. He threw a fit and caught the attention of the others at the party. They wondered what the fuss was about, and my dad reluctantly told them. They were upset and all of them left. A few days later, my cousin Ron, who was in middle school at the time, confessed to his parents that Uncle Tim had made them touch each other. They took him to court, and he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. He only touched him one time, but that is still sick. I've never heard or seen Uncle Tim again, and I surely do not want to, ever. Thankfully, my dad did get better and had apologized for taking his brother's side over ours. He, too, never wants to see him again. It's crazy how people close and dear to you can turn out to be creeps.
Birth mother tried to kidnap me. The story I'm about to tell you is very difficult for me. It has never been told in its entirety. Although I have shared bits and pieces with certain people, I am going to use a throwaway account for what should become obvious reasons. I am willing to verify as much as I can with the mods through private message. I guess I should start at the beginning. That's usually a good place. I am a female, now 32. I am adopted. There were 6 kids born to my birth mom, Jane. I know very little about my older siblings, other than what was told by family and friends of the family. The first was taken at a young age, possibly birth, and adopted out due to Jane's inability to care for her. I do not know who the father was. We did meet her once, about 17 years ago. Jane served time in prison after neglecting the next two so badly that they died. She was convicted of manslaughter. I don't know how many years she was in, but after she got out, she met my father, Dale, who was at least 10 years younger than her. She was apparently still married to her first husband when I was born, as his name was on my birth certificate, even though he was never legally considered my father. My brother Eugene was born nearly 2 years later. Obviously, social services was watching her very closely. It didn't take them long to realize that she hadn't magically acquired a mother's instinct while in prison. I don't know what Dale was thinking getting involved with her, but I do know that he cared about us and loved us deeply. He struggled to provide for us, while Jane stayed at home and did whatever she did. We were often left in our own filth and given very little to or nothing to eat. When Jane visited family and friends, we were handed off to them to be changed, cleaned, and fed. Like she expected everyone but her to care for her children. Social services removed us from the home multiple times, only to return us because Dale promised them that he would make everything work. At some point during this whole ordeal, Jane hooked up with John, who she says was Dale's best friend. I was very young at the time, so all I remember is a man coming over while Dale was away. And there was a sense of wrongness to him. Eugene remembers even less, more a negative air to the place we used to live. I also remember John had an insect tattoo on a visible part of his body. To this day, I hate that insect as a tattoo. Somehow, it was discovered that she was with John. I don't know what Dale's reaction to it was. I do know that social services immediately put their foot down and said she could not have him around her children. Apparently, he had a reputation with children and could not be trusted. Instead of kicking her lover out, Jane left with him and moved across the country. While I am lucky enough not to remember anything, I showed signs of having been severely molested as a child. I won't go into details here, other than to say that it's very likely that Jane was aware, and even more likely that John was the culprit. With no one to care for his children, and not making enough to afford childcare, Dale struggled for a while before deciding to give us up to a family he knew as good people, before the state could split us up. Jane had already lost custody and parental rights, so Dale signed everything he could. Jane was still legally our mother, so he was unable to adopt us over to the couple when we were 5 and 3. Trusting that we would be in good hands. He stayed in touch and sent gifts, visiting on rare occasions he could afford to travel. When my parents were in the area, they made sure he knew so he could see us. We hadn't heard from Jane in a while, when all of a sudden, shortly before my 8th birthday, she showed up one day at my new house. There were no legal restrictions about her seeing me, but my parents were on guard. This grew on a massive scale when she announced that her and John, who was now married to and pregnant by, were moving into the area. This triggered the scariest period of my childhood. They began to try to separate Eugene and me from our parents. In their minds, if we weren't with our parents, we would be returned to Jane. Never mind that she had already been proven unfit. In their eyes, it was a foolproof plan. Initially, they began to spread rumors of abuse and mishandling. They called social services and made false claims. They lied to friends of the family. When this didn't work, they started actively trying to kidnap us. My parents were upfront with us about what was going on. They believed if we knew the truth, we could better protect ourselves. We were always with a member of the family. They let Jane see us, but never alone. Someone was always there in the same room. My family was told by people who were familiar with Jane that they wanted us for the welfare check. For my 8th birthday, John walked up to my father and stated that he and Jane were going to be taking Eugene and me out for ice cream. My father refused, saying that they always made birthdays a family affair, and that Jane and John were welcome to come over and join us. John later told a friend of our family that he was so angry if Eugene and I hadn't been standing right there watching, he would have punched my father. After this, I believe they started watching the house, waiting for my parents to leave. I think they knew that my parents sometimes allowed an older sibling to sit us, and that they could overpower a young teenager. We lived in a safe neighborhood, rural area where we didn't have any close neighbors. The mentality was that every homeowner owned guns and handled issues themselves. I remember hiding in one of the bedrooms with Eugene while they walked around the outside of the house, hammering on the doors and windows. Our older foster brother looked at us with a rifle cocked across his arm and told us, "I know she's your mom, but if they come through that door, I'm shooting them." After they lost custody of their child due to neglect, they broke up and went their separate ways, leaving the state. The stalking stopped. We were allowed to grow up in peace, seeing Jane only occasionally when we visited her state to see other family members. When I was 14, Jane called me, crying, saying she had decided to sign the adoption papers. She had finally given up on getting us back. John's grandmother got custody of their child, Ryan. She did right by him, but when he was 11 and I was 19, he was killed in a car accident. His grandma requested that I sing at his funeral. Both Jane and John were there. John was not sitting with the rest of the group, but he was off to the side and had a man with him. As we were leaving to go to the gravesite, John stood by the doorway and grabbed me on my way out. He tried to pull me into a hug, crying about how he had missed you kids. I stood still for a split second, stunned, before pulling away. At the same time I drew back, the man with him firmly grasped his upper arm and pulled him back. After I got home, it began to bother me that John was still out there. I wondered how much, if anything, had been documented of his behavior with me or other children. I looked him up online and found that he was a registered sex offender, but not for what he had done to me. He was listed as having sexual contact with a child under 13 as recently as 2005, 4 years after I had seen him at the funeral. Recently, I had asked Dale's mother, with whom I had stayed in touch off and on throughout the years, what she knew about it. She said that she knew John and Jane had wanted to make money off of me, and that is why they wanted me back, specifically me. At this time, I had been told and believed they wanted both Eugene and me for benefit reasons. Now I'm not so sure we had the story right.